Good day, dear viewers. I want to tell you that this part of the story is the next episode of the previous video, the link to which I will leave in the comments of this video. On one hand, her husband was clear that girls shouldn't be here by the evening. Layla herself realized they couldn't handle another child, struggling as they were. All of that was clear and logical. But the other side of the coin, words like special institution, orphanage was unacceptable to Layla. She remembered how hard it had been for her to live and grow up in an orphanage, bullying from other children and harsh punishments from caregivers. It was all in her past, but she was accustomed to hardships from a very young age. Mila, on the other hand, seemed entirely different. Apparently, she was from a caring family, perhaps a bit spoiled. She had an obvious psychological trauma, not remembering her past or even her real name. Layla could tell that the girl wouldn't survive in the harsh conditions of an orphanage. At that moment, the woman didn't have time for lengthy contemplation, but it became her motivation to make a decision. Looking squarely at the officer, she firmly stated, "The girl will live with us." The policeman, hearing this response, showed candor. "I grew up in an orphanage myself, and I don't think that's the place for this girl." "That's exactly what I thought," Layla replied coldly. "Leaving her with you isn't entirely within the rules, but I will try to resolve this matter. If we find out anything about the girl's relatives, we'll call you, but honestly, I'd advise you to start your own search. Sometimes the internet can be more helpful than the police," advised the officer. When Layla returned to her cozy home, where an atmosphere of tranquility reigned, she noticed Mateo, shaken and upset. The boy had just returned from school and sadly showed his mother his diary, where his tardiness and a note from the teacher were recorded. "I'm sorry, Mom," whispered her son. "I should have woken up by myself." "No, you shouldn't have," Layla replied. "You know waking everyone up in the mornings is my responsibility. It's not just a rule, it's an agreement between us. So, if anything, I should apologize to you." From their conversation, it was evident that there was no extra girl in the apartment. Mateo stayed silent, but his expression betrayed confusion. Layla, looking at her son, pondered again how lucky she was to have such carefree and trouble-free child. Leaving the younger ones under the supervision of the elder, Layla started preparing lunch. After the meal, when the girls went back to their room, her son approached her with a pressing question. "Mom, will Mila stay with us? I asked her, but she hasn't made up her mind yet," Layla replied. "This girl needs our help, she's lost. If we don't give her shelter, she'll end up in an orphanage." "That's great that she'll stay," Mateo suddenly remarked. "Why?" his mother asked, surprised. "The little ones like her," the son replied seriously. "So, it'll be easier for both of us now." Layla affectionately patted his head and responded with a bright laugh. Then she resumed her usual household chores, laundry, cleaning, preparing dinner for her husband's return. She avoided thoughts about what would happen when her husband returned from work, but an unexpected quarrel surpassed all her expectations. "What is this?" he almost shouted, pacing back and forth through the kitchen. "You're not satisfied with our kids, now you're bringing another one." "She wasn't just brought in," Layla defended the girl. "And it's temporary until we find her parents. We can't leave her in an orphanage. Look at her, she's absolutely a home child. That's not the place for her. There are special facilities for such cases, while here, she can find her family." "What do you know about the expenses related to children?" exclaimed Layla. "Have you ever bought anything for them? Can you imagine the needs of a child?" She herself didn't understand what had prompted her to start this accusatory speech. Perhaps years of accumulated resentment needed an outlet. Her husband listened to her angry tirade silently, not attempting to interrupt or argue. He seemed surprised by such sharpness from his usually affectionate and calm wife, even in conflict situations. Layla expressed everything that had accumulated within her, about finances, relationships, love, and romance, noting that the money he earned clearly wasn't enough for life. She reminded him of various luxurious purchases he made after the children were born, while she had to meticulously count every penny to provide the entire family with food and clothing. She wasn't demanding lavish gifts or bouquets of flowers. She simply longed for human attention, warmth, and involvement. Instead, she was continually faced with unfair reproaches. "Well," Liam said in an absolutely calm tone after Layla finished her emotional monologue, "I suppose everyone will be much better off without me." This ominous statement hung in the air, and the man didn't utter another word. He silently began packing his belongings into a large suitcase from the bedroom closet. Layla, perhaps, should have started crying, apologizing to her husband, pleading with him not to make hasty decisions, and expressing her love for him, all things she would have done without hesitation just 2 days ago. However, now she watched what was happening with a cool detachment that seemed to engulf her. Liam was slowly getting ready, occasionally glancing at Layla. He seemed to expect her usual reactions or maybe tried to frighten her even more than he actually intended to leave. However, his plan didn't work, and by the time the suitcase was ready, he couldn't turn back. Fine then, the engineer muttered, slamming the front door shut. Layla spent a few more minutes in the kitchen, then waved her hand and headed to the children's room. There, Mila and Mateo were trying to calm down the younger ones, who were clearly frightened by what was happening in the kitchen. The older children were as pale as a sheet, but feeling their responsibility, they tried not to panic and maintain calmness among the younger ones. The woman hugged all 4 children tightly. "Daddy won't come back anymore," Mateo finally asked. Layla noticed there was not a drop of regret in his voice, rather, indifference. He didn't care whether Dad would return or not. This man, rarely at home, even on weekends, was almost a stranger to the children. "I don't know, to be honest," she replied. "Maybe he'll come back at some point." So, they remained, living as a group of 5, 4 children and Layla herself. If initially she feared she wouldn't cope without her husband's help, she soon discovered it wasn't the case. Without constant arguments and strange demands, life became much easier and calmer. And this was despite the fact that money hadn't really increased. Liam allocated only a small amount from his salary for household expenses, while Layla covered most of it from her maternity and child benefits. However, soon there came a time when the initial benefits were due to end, which posed certain problems. Layla realized that working full-time with 4 young children was practically impossible. However, her husband leaving pushed her to find the strength and time to gradually start looking for opportunities to work, even if only part-time. And unexpectedly, a few fortunate occurrences came her way. First, the director from the daycare where she awaited her children's enrollment called. Without disclosing anything over the phone, she strongly urged Layla to come to the daycare for a personal conversation. "Hello," she began. "As I understand, you've been waiting for your children to join our daycare for quite some time. It's taking so long that one of your children has already started school," Layla responded somewhat irritatedly. "Allow me to tell you a secret," noted the director. "By the time your turn comes, your youngest daughter will also make it. Many never get into our daycare. We have far more applications than spots, so don't be angry with me. It's not my initiative, and I can't change this situation." "So, did you invite me just to inform me of the lack of chances?" asked Layla. "Quite the opposite. I invited you to propose a solution to this situation. You see, one of our nursery nurses recently left, and we've had instability in this position for a long time. Finding a replacement is challenging. Our staff are struggling and on the verge of falling apart. I decided to offer this vacancy to those who have long been waiting in line. There's a lot of work, the pay isn't high, but we'll be able to immediately accept your children into the appropriate age group." "And why are you choosing me specifically?" Layla asked suspiciously. "I don't even have a pedagogical education. Surely, there are more suitable candidates. You have 3 children of your own. Believe me, in your situation, that's much more important. However, we've proposed this not only to you, as you put it, more suitable candidates, but none of them agreed. We've compiled a list of those who might be interested in such work, and you're not the first to whom we're offering this opportunity. Does this offer suit you?" This option suited Layla. Now, she had some work that she could combine with taking care of her younger children. The older children were independent enough to spend a few hours at home without her presence and prepare their own lunch. Moreover, the daycare was conveniently located close to both their school and home, and even though their life wasn't ideal, they managed no worse than before Liam left. Life started to normalize, and after some time, another fortunate event occurred. This time, Layla called the same police officer to her home who a few weeks ago had taken her statement when she found Mila on the street. "Any news about her parents?" Layla inquired hopefully. "Unfortunately, nothing new," replied the police officer. "As I mentioned before, we don't have much information about her. Have you tried finding out something on your own?" "No, I haven't had the time for that," the woman shrugged. "You know, apart from her, I have 3 other children. And recently, my husband left." "I see," sighed the police officer. "But the point is, I called you for a very specific reason. I've officially arranged for Mila to reside with you. Now, you can enroll her in school and so forth." "Great," Layla thanked. "It was really difficult that Mila couldn't attend school. I've been educating her on my own, but I understand the need to sort this out before the start of the next academic year." Summer was fast approaching, signifying an imminent need. "Yes, among other things, you're now Mila's official guardian," the police officer noted. This entails certain allowances. Also, as I understand, given your large family, you may be eligible for various benefits and assistance. As the police officer had said, it turned out, of course, there was never enough money for everything. But now Layla could be assured that her children would be clothed, fed, and sent to school. Contrary to her fears, life didn't collapse after Liam's departure, not only financially but also emotionally. However hard she tried, she couldn't muster any emotions about his leaving. It seemed that something inside her burned out at the moment when her husband recklessly accused her of an imaginary infidelity. Such lack of reaction surprised Layla herself, but at the same time, it couldn't help but bring her a sense of satisfaction. With 4 children to care for, the anguish associated with a shattered love affair would have been highly inappropriate. Perhaps the children became the source of her inner peace. With all the responsibilities, she had no time to sink into sadness and despair. Another 2 years passed. To accommodate the comfort of all family members, a provisional decision was made to divide the apartment into 2 parts, one for the males and one for the females. Mila and the youngest, Riley, moved into the room where the adults used to stay, while Mateo remained in his room with his brother, Jackson. It was a bit cramped, but it didn't pose significant problems. The friendship between Mila and Mateo grew stronger with each passing day. They now attended the same school, despite the girl being a year younger. Mateo treated her like a younger sister, showing care and support. Mila also developed warm and friendly relations with the younger children. Despite her unexpected arrival, Mila seamlessly integrated into the family atmosphere. For Layla, she became like a biological daughter, and at times, the woman forgot that this was not the actual case. From Mila's side, she quickly accustomed herself to calling Layla mom and her children brothers and sisters. The day when the girl was found, they decided to celebrate as her 2nd birthday. For Layla, it held a particular symbolic meaning, as no one knew what could have happened to Mila if she hadn't been rescued. In a sense, it could be said that the horrific scene Liam created that evening saved the girl from an even more tragic fate. Layla, rejoicing in Mila's newfound status as her daughter, couldn't stop wondering why nobody was searching for the child. Following the police officer's advice, she posted advertisements about the found girl, but to no avail. Even law enforcement authorities couldn't trace her parents. Layla worried that the girl hadn't returned to her family. She couldn't comprehend why Mila had no memories before waking up in the park. It gave the impression as if, until that moment, Mila simply didn't exist in this world. Of course, this seemed impossible, and Layla desperately wanted to uncover the truth about the girl's past. But the doctors at the regular clinic just shrugged. They had never encountered such complex cases and didn't know what to do in such a situation. The only thing one of them could suggest was contacts for a good private clinic specializing in aiding children who had lost their memory. However, of course, the family didn't have the money for such services. Mila herself, without memories of the past, didn't worry about it. She lived in the present moment, childishly naive, delighting in each new day, only knowing that today was good. What came before didn't hold much significance for her. This also puzzled Layla, and in a way, she envied her foster daughter. In her own childhood, Layla also wished to know about her parents and why they were no longer with her. She even made her caregiver uncomfortable with her questions, to the point where she had to respond to her directly and honestly. They were alcoholics, useless, and you're just the same. Then they died. Do you find the answer satisfactory? Now go clean the toilets, it's your turn today. Recalling this moment, Layla sometimes thought, perhaps it was good that Mila wasn't interested in her past. But when she found the girl, Mila didn't seem like a child who had had a rough life. Quite the opposite. Sometimes she thought that living with her biological family might have been much more pleasant and cozier for Mila. But Layla couldn't change this situation, despite all her efforts. Gradually, she reconciled with the thought that they probably wouldn't ever learn the whole truth about the past. At that moment, she finally resolved that Mila wasn't just temporarily living with her but was an integral part of her family. The question arose about not just being her guardian but permanently adopting the child. However, a strange and simultaneously sorrowful legal intricacy emerged. While still officially married, Layla had to make the tough decision to get a divorce because, without her husband's agreement, she couldn't adopt Mila. This meant only one thing, the necessity to start divorce proceedings. With a heavy heart, she dialed Liam's number. Layla absolutely didn't want to communicate with this person, and she would have preferred a divorce through the court. But that would take much more time. and she hoped for an amicable separation to part ways with her ex-husband, not just practically but also officially, without having any contact with him for 2 years. "Layla, finally heard from you." Liam's affectionate voice came through the phone. "I'm so glad you finally called me. You have no idea how much I've missed you." Layla felt a strange mix of emotions that wouldn't let her define her feelings. On one hand, Liam's words touched her heart, as if soothing a sore spot, yet they brought a certain sweet discomfort. The tone in which he spoke to her seemed to penetrate her memory, invoking those happy times before all the tragic events that had affected them both. His words hinted at their past, swirling her in a vortex of pleasant memories. However, on the other hand, such an address now seemed excessively inappropriate and out of place. "I knew you missed me and that eventually you'd make the right decision," Liam continued, as if persuading her with inspiration. "Are you really willing to leave your husband because of some street girl? You're calling now to say that the problem is solved. I'll be back, and all those happy memories will return like magic." Her husband's last words abruptly brought Layla back to the time when he left, and she didn't feel particularly upset about it. His words reminded her of the reason for their separation. She responded with the coldest tone possible. "Liam, I'm calling to ask for a divorce." "So, have you already found yourself a new man?" His voice suddenly lost all its previous tenderness. "You're jumping to conclusions. I haven't found anyone, and besides, it's none of your business. Ever since you left me with 4 kids without support, as you said back then, we've managed just fine without you. And now, I want to finalize this last formality." "I didn't abandon you," the woman declared indignantly. "I just couldn't stay in the same apartment with that girl, and I couldn't take on any more responsibility. I walked out of your life until you sorted out that issue," the husband retorted. "Believe me, I've resolved all my problems except one, which is why I'm calling you. Let's end this useless conversation. Liam, you're no longer needed by me or my kids." Layla was left stunned by what she heard. Could it be that he really wouldn't agree to a divorce? And would he threaten to deprive her and the kids of their only corner if she insisted? These weren't the romantic and loving newlyweds she once married. Despite all this, she had no other way out. She tried to peacefully negotiate with her husband several times but realized all her efforts were futile. There were only 2 options: either she gets rid of Mila and Liam comes back home, or a divorce through court with his share of the apartment. There was nothing else on the table that he was willing to consider. "I understand you need time to recover," he said in one of those conversations. "I'm not rushing to make a decision, but since you've chosen to talk to me, bear in mind, I expect this decision from you, and even my patience has its limits." Layla didn't want to prolong this process, maintaining the status quo. It was evident that this couldn't be dragged on indefinitely. It needed a resolution now. Just like the official adoption of Mila, the divorce was a formality. But what if, for instance, she wanted to remarry again? After lengthy contemplation, Layla made the decision to file for divorce. However, before that, she tried to explain to the children that changes in their living conditions might occur, and they might have to temporarily move to a 1-bedroom apartment. She was pleasantly surprised and relieved to see that the kids understood the situation. Liam attempted to claim his share of the apartment through court, but his demand was rejected by the court. They explained that all the children lived with their mother, and dividing the apartment was impossible until some of the children moved in with their father. The room fell into a tense silence. The children were too young for their opinions to be considered. Everything depended on Liam's decision. He could agree to the proposal, in which case the children would stay with their mother, but he would be entitled to compensation for his share of the apartment. The decision turned out to be the only possible compromise in this complex situation. Despite this, Layla had to pay in installments for many years, considering her modest income and the number of dependents. This decision, though unsatisfactory for both parties, turned out to be the only possible compromise. For Layla's family, the situation emerged as a victory, one the children perceived as such. But unexpectedly for them, the legal process seemed frightening, especially the idea of separation and the prospect of living with a father whom the younger ones couldn't even remember. Now that all that was behind them, the children were rejoicing. Layla, having become a completely free woman and the longtime guardian of Mila, managed, though with difficulty, to achieve the official adoption of the girl. This became a reason for a celebration from their perspective. The essential components were supposed to be an affordable but delicious store-bought cake and a trip to the amusement park. None of them had visited such a place before. Each of them had dreamed of being there at least once. For 3 months, the woman bought everything she could just to gather enough money for this trip and give her children a genuine entertainment. And finally, the long-awaited day arrived. The kids looked around with interest, trying to decide which of the various amusements they'd like to try. Of course, it wasn't possible to go on all the attractions at once, and fortunately, even the youngest understood these limitations. Only Mila, usually noisy and cheerful, behaved unusually quietly. She looked around with a strange expression on her face, as if surprised why she was there, but this surprise was completely different from everyone else's. "Mila, are you okay?" Layla asked her, concerned about the girl's atypical behavior. "Yes, everything's fine," she replied in a quiet and colorless voice. This surprised the woman even more. The child's intonation didn't match the meaning of her words, which was unusual for Mila, an open and trusting girl. She typically didn't hide her emotions, so her attempt to do so failed, causing more concern to her foster mother. Nevertheless, Layla decided not to continue the dialogue. She realized that if Mila had reasons to conceal her feelings, the child would eventually share them in her own time. No matter how much Layla pleaded, she realized that pushing would only deepen the girl's seclusion. There was a significant chance that she herself would feel the desire to share her feelings. As it happened, the children, Layla's biological kids, were completely absorbed in the atmosphere around them, debating which ride to try first. Eventually, they reached a consensus and headed towards the Ferris wheel. Mila suddenly declined the suggestion to join them, explaining her refusal with a fear of heights. No one tried to persuade her. Along with Layla, they sat on a bench from where they could clearly see the cabin of the Ferris wheel where the others set off.